Another high-stakes meeting about a possible peace deal in Ukraine is set for tomorrow in Saudi Arabia. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Walz are expected to be there. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is set to arrive as early as today in the port city of Jeddah. The meeting, hosted by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, will be the first between officials from the U.S. and Ukraine since talks in the Oval Office turned into a shouting match. Scripps News Deputy Political Director Joe St. George joins us now live from Capitol Hill with more. So, Joe, the president really hoping that some sort of deal will get done, not a guarantee. What are you expecting from this meeting tomorrow?
Well, Patrick, there's really two tracks of a deal that we'll be watching carefully from our perch here in Washington. And one is any deal making between the U.S. and Ukraine. Remember what's transpired in recent days in the aftermath of that dust-up between President Zelenskyy and President Trump in the Oval Office. You had a mineral deal that wasn't signed. Now, it seemed as though, if you read the tea leaves with diplomats and with lawmakers, is that relationships have improved since that dust-up in the Oval Office. Could this mineral deal be signed? Remember, it can happen without Trump and Zelenskyy in the same room, for instance. U.S. intelligence sharing with Ukraine has been off limits for several days on Air Force One last night en route from Palm Beach International Airport, West Palm Beach area to Washington, D.C. The president indicated that they just about restored intelligence sharing. What does that mean? I think we'll learn more out of this meeting in Saudi Arabia. What does military assistance of any kind, look like between the U.S. and Ukraine going forward? So you have the one track of, all right, what is relations between the U.S. and Ukraine going to look like after this meeting in Saudi Arabia, in the desert, in the Middle East? And then you have the separate track, which I think the world is watching for. What does Ukraine-Russia relations look like? Is a ceasefire possible? Certainly in recent days, President Zelenskyy of Ukraine has begun to set the terms of what a ceasefire would look like. Do we get any more information on what that may transpire? Again, a big part of the high-stakes, high-profile meeting between U.S. officials and Ukrainian officials in Saudi Arabia. Our eagle-eyed Scripps News viewers will realize this is the same country that hosted talks between the U.S. and Russia just a few days ago, really. Secretary of State led that delegation. Secretary of State Rubio is also leading this delegation. Again, massive week for the state of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. President Trump teed up the importance of Tuesday's meetings in Saudi Arabia aboard Air Force One last night.
There are big meetings coming up, as you know, in Saudi Arabia. That's going to include Russia. It'll be Ukraine. We'll see if we can get something done. Like to get something done. A lot of people died this week, as you know, in Ukraine. Not only Ukrainians, but Russians. So I think everybody wants to see it get done. We're going to make a lot of progress, I believe, this week.
So a massive week indeed. We'll see if there's any major developments coming out of it tomorrow. Given the time change, Patrick, we're really just hours away from conversations getting underway.
Absolutely. And, Joe, I guess we also have some news today on these cuts to USAID, that agency under the Secretary of State Marco Rubio's jurisdiction. What do we know about that?
Well, overnight, the Secretary of State provided a little more guidance as to what USAID will look like, or what his vision of it. Remember, there's legal challenges aplenty with this, but what USAID will look like going forward. Not a complete dismantling of the organization. There's some contracts that remain, and we stress the word some. On social media, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and I'm quoting the Secretary of State at this point, the Secretary saying, after a 6-week review, we are officially canceling 83% of the programs at USAID. The 5,200 contracts that are now canceled spent tens of billions of dollars in ways that did not serve, and in some cases harmed, the core national interests of the United States. Again, this is from Secretary Marco Rubio overnight. He went on to say that about 1,000 contracts or so will remain, and it will remain under the auspices, under the jurisdiction, more closely regulated by the Secretary of State, the Department of State, and by himself. So that's a little more clarity of what USAID is going to look like in the Trump administration. Of course, as you know, the political and the legal disputes over USAID, Patrick, continue.
All right, Scripps News Deputy Political Director Joe St. George for us. Joe, thank you.